Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the meeting of the Affordable Housing Ad Hoc Committee for July. I'm excited to see some guests. Thank you so much for coming to listen in. And we are hoping to have another couple of people enjoying us shortly, but we don't want to hold things up. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. So the role for the moment, you have myself, Councilmember Edie and Councilmember Seed. And so since we do not have a quorum, we will not be doing the meeting minutes at this moment in time. Do we have anyone who would like to speak for public participation? Any of our folks online interested in speaking?
I could just add if those online from the public aren't aware, if you'd like to make a comment at this meeting tonight, you could use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen or press *9.
Okay, doesn't look like we have anyone. Hi, Steve. Doesn't look like we have anyone who wishes to speak. So at this time, we will close public participation and move on to the next item on our agenda. So Michelle, I am eager to hear from you on our update. So again, for folks who may not have been following closely, the affordable housing plan that the city approved earlier this spring included in it quite a number of recommendations, and we have transformed that into an actual tracker that we can keep updated, particularly to reflect as we have modified items based on feedback from the various departments. And so we really can hold ourselves accountable for continuing to make progress on the recommendations. Don't want this just to sit on the shelf. It is too important. So Michelle would love to get updates on what progress has been made on the tracker in the last couple of months.
Sure. So a couple of Planning and Zoning Commission amendments that were recently, I think, end of May, for the workforce housing regulations. There are some action items in regards to making some amendments with density bonuses and things like that. So there is new language that's been approved to allow a 5% density bonus for 10 or more. And again, if anybody online that is interested in seeing the specifics, reach out to me and I can provide those. So there was a density bonus language that was adopted, and then there was language that would allow recertifying tenants that are already in the program to remain in the program, but allow them to have a bump in their income annually up to 90% state median income. So we passed those, and then there.
Can I just real quick, thank you for doing the latter. This is something that I know we've talked about quite a bit. There's, the value of creating stability for folks and then, pulling it away from them the moment they've achieved it is, sort of counter to the goals. So I think this flexibility approach is really valuable. But can you just explain what a density bonus is in case that term is not clear to folks?
Yeah, so more specifically, in that language, it was to incentivize 2-bedroom units. So when you build a development over 10 units, 10% of those units have to be deed restricted affordable. But if you do a 2-bedroom, it counts, I believe, as 1.5. So I think, and Steve, if I'm explaining this wrong, I know you kind of carried more of that through, but it allowed developers to have more density when they're providing us more 2-bedroom units, because that was a demand in the housing plan.
Yeah, so that one actually wasn't a density bonus. That one allowed them to count a 2-bedroom unit as 1.5 workforce units. So in the regulations prior, there was an allowance if you provided a 3-bedroom unit, that would count as 2 workforce units, and it was an incentive to get more 3-bedroom units. So we so since the affordable housing plan identified 2 bedroom units is also a need, we followed a similar formula, just gave them just a different ratio.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful because I think this is a sometimes a point, or I had seen in in comments in response to one of the most recent plans that had these larger affordable units, and people were not understanding the calculation. And I think it's, as you say, it's really important to highlight that this is a specific response to an identified need and figuring out how we can incentivize meeting that need. So getting more larger apartments, because people need more larger apartments, and we really were otherwise not getting enough of those into the affordable housing program. So I appreciate that. Is
Yeah.
the density bonus, was there an additional item as well? Yes, okay.
Yeah, and I don't remember the specifics. Sorry, apologize. But yeah, there was a provision in there to get, I think it was a 5% bump. Michelle, and if you want to go on, I can dig it out. I didn't have that one in front of me. One only thing I wanted to add about the other clause that we talked about was the technically, if you allow the units to count as either 1.5 units or 2 units for the 3 bedroom, Norwalk's percent of affordability counted towards the statute 8-30G would technically lower, but I think it's very minuscule. So we did put a kind of like bottom to that. So if we ever got to the point where we were at 12%, that regulation would no longer be in effect. But I don't think we'll ever approach that, but we just put it in there as a safeguard.
And that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so if at some point you want to come back to the density bonus issue, that would be helpful. But again, I think what we're really highlighting here is that these were some low-hanging fruit that were identified of ways to really try to meet needs that had been identified. And again, the goal was to move them forward fairly rapidly. And I appreciate that you all have worked with planning and zoning to get that, the Planning and Zoning Commission to get that done.
I think that was the bulk of the zoning amendments that we did so far. I know there's other recommendations that we'll have to do more analysis on to move forward with. But to continue some of more of the action item in other categories, we did have a speaker to help us kind of learn more about the tax abatement stuff. I know council members on this call were there, but just for the public to know, there is a recording of that. I thought it was really informative. But the city is contemplating maybe doing some kind of very tailored tax abatement for the type of housing that we are looking for, whether that be, elderly or what have you. So we did that at the end of May. And then more recently, Steve, I think 2 weeks ago, Steve, we sent over all our legislative proposals to the mayor's office, kind of for a preliminary look. Off the bat, as they're reviewing, I think the next steps were to get legal review of it. So we're gonna work with the Corporation Counsel office with those legislative items to see how viable they are, what their recommendations would be. Steve, if there's anything else I'm missing that we've been kind of working on, or you wanted to add?
No, just on that one, I think, like you said, I reached out to Mario. I don't know who on his team he wanted to start the analysis of, because there's 3 different proposals. So they thought it was a good idea if we just vet some things based, to make sure our assumptions are correct so far, and then ask us to do a little more research on a couple specific areas. But our goal is to try to, hopefully by the end of August, have this passed down the line to our legislative delegation to, see what they think, and then see what we can do. Is it possible to get something included in the next session, which I understand is a short session? If not, then we'll aim for the following session, but that's kind of where we stand.
Great. And I think, again, for folks listening, one of the things that I really appreciated about the housing plan was its emphasis on the fact that if the city knows, as we do know, that we cannot do many of the things that we want to do because they are not permitted by state law, we really have to begin to take proactive steps to engage with changing the state law. And so I appreciate Michelle and Steve kind of not only developing these proposals, but helping us begin to develop a process for moving these kind of proposals forward. Because I think, quite frankly, there are a number of other things that we also need to work on. But learning to figuring out how to begin doing this is going to be, I think, an important part of that process going forward. So thank you. And I just want to note for the record that Councilmember Ayers joined us, I think about 6:10, and Councilmember Darlene Young has just joined us now at 6:13. Okay, so thank you, Michelle. That's helpful.
I think I just failed to also say the 3 legislative items, whereas one was looking at supporting grocery stores in urban areas, and the other one was kind of unraveling the home ownership and condo, why we haven't seen condo development. So trying to see what kind of tweaks at the legislative level we could do to make condos more viable. And then another one was with the tax sale with delinquent properties, with them having the housing authority be the people to have the first right of refusal for those properties. So the city would be able to have those properties be affordable to residents. So I don't think I said that. So just a little helpful for the public.
Terrific. Thank you. Other items from the tracker that we should hear about?
I think that's the summary that I had in mind. But I know we're chipping away at it, and we'll meet in August. I think you said that might be a good time to kind of go over things and evaluate where we want to move.
Yes, I think so. I think that sounds like a good plan. As folks know, we typically don't have council. We frequently cancel the council committee meetings in August because so many people are out of town. And I think it's probably a great opportunity for us to then have some sit down meetings, with you and with Steve, and really sort of game out what we want to accomplish in the next couple of months. So let's plan on that. And I think committee members, we should probably plan on not having an August meeting. I think that will be we would normally be scheduled to be essentially the first week of school, and that is chaos. So let's just all have on our calendars that for now, the next committee meeting will be in September, although we may circulate some proposals for people to consider before then. One thing that I will flag to follow up on your point, Michelle, about the tax abatement presentation, which we had, which I thought was incredibly helpful, is that is a conversation we would like to start moving forward. And again, it's not going to get passed anytime soon, but I think developing a solid new proposal for how to do much more targeted tax abatements that really move forward the kinds of housing that we are missing in Norwalk, and that we need to specifically incentivize. That's going to be a joint conversation probably between this committee and the ordinance committee, and is probably going to take, quite a bit of back and forth. So I think that's another goal to really get started, recognizing that realistically it probably will not be implemented until there's a new mayor. But at least we can get the conversation going and really start laying the groundwork for that, because that will be, I think, take quite a bit of work to get right. So I think that's a terrific update on the tracker. Now that we do have a quorum, perhaps we can go back and the regular meeting minutes for May 29th of 2025. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Miss Edie. Any changes, corrections, omissions? Okay. Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? Okay, I think Ms. Ayers. Thank you, Ms. Young.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so that passes unanimously, and we can move on then to our next item. So our final item for the meeting tonight is a presentation on what's called missing middle housing. And I was recently chided, I think correctly, by someone for the ways in which all of the jargon that we use, even though well-intentioned, is not necessarily helpful. And so missing middle is just I think, a convenient way to talk about everything that sort of sits in between single family housing and large apartments. And, I asked Michelle and Steve to do a presentation for us on this topic because I think that it is feedback that we hear frequently, right? People are concerned about the sort of prevalence of what people call big box apartments or 5/2s or all sorts of, I heard someone call them the fortress apartments at some point. And at the same time, we really need to increase our housing opportunities in Norwalk, right? That is a clear reality. And we need to do so in a way that um, makes provides us with homes that are less expensive to build, less expensive to live in. Doing that is going to require having houses probably that are closer together. And so if we want to have something in between single family housing and very large scale apartments, we really need to understand what those are, what those look like. And so I thought it would be very helpful to sort of have this conversation with folks. What does that mean? What are our choices? What are our options? How can these things be achieved? What are the challenges? What are the financial pros and cons? What are the things we would have to think about in terms of zoning, in terms of incentives for builders? What are the practical realities? Traffic is obviously an ongoing concern. And at the same time, we also have to think about, uh, you know, the ways in which traffic is created by the fact that many people are living out of Norwalk and commuting here to work because we have insufficient affordable housing for people who actually work in Norwalk. And so some push-pull around that, I think, is always helpful to keep in mind. Anyway, I will turn it over to you, Steve and Michelle. I'm really excited to see your presentation. I think we probably should take a couple of pauses at various points throughout it. Maybe after you sort of go through the initial descriptions, maybe we'll take a pause for questions. And then as you get into some of the, questions about zoning options, maybe we'll take then a pause again after that for questions so that we don't go too long without people being able to ask follow-ups.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So as Nora said, tonight we're discussing missing middle housing and what that could look like for Norwalk. We'll also touch on things we've accomplished and possible future options as well. So first I'll define missing middle housing. And I'll say that I didn't come up with the phrase. Daniel Porlock, he coined this term, and it's nationally recognized and is an issue that's all over the country. So they define this missing because there's these types of housing units that have been illegal to build since the 40s. So we only saw two types of building types, single families and larger building complexes, and essentially nothing else was being built through those decades. It represents a middle scale of building between single family homes and large apartment or condo buildings. These are generally 2 to 10. They could be more, but for our purposes, we're thinking targeting Norwalk's missing middle could look like maybe 2 to 10 units. The middle also relates to the affordability and attainability of level. This type of housing stock delivers attainable housing options to middle income families, most often without subsidies, and continue to play a role in providing homes to the middle income market inventory. However, this isn't exclusive to the middle income markets. Missing middle housing types could be applied in luxury, it could be applied in affordable or middle incomes. It's really about the form and scale of the buildings rather than focusing on the income markets, because ultimately it's whatever is going to be marketable at the end of the day of what that town or city wants. Some primary concepts to missing middle housing. Like I just said, the form and scale matter more than the number of units. Scale is consistent with existing building stock in neighborhoods. So these buildings aren't an eyesore within a neighborhood, isn't any bigger than the houses next to it, but it's really supposed to, fit into the neighborhood. It's important to differentiate between missing middle housing types that are designated in certain zones. So as you'll see that there's different housing types that could be smaller, like you'll see the duplexes, the triplexes, and then some multiplex or cottage courts that I'll discuss further that could be designated in certain zones that make more sense. So it depends on what you're looking for in which part of the town or city. The core missing middle housing are types that have small to medium footprints with a body width, depth, and height no larger than a single family. Some instances it could be larger, but the core idea of missing middle housing is that it, has a lot of features of a single family. This type of housing could be rental or for sale, either or. They've seen it work. And then ideally, these types are in more walkable urban context. However, it doesn't prohibit this type of housing concept in suburban areas. It just depends really on what you're looking for. I like this image just because it really just shows you that bracket that we're looking at, and then the detached single families and the larger complexes. So I'll cover this band tonight. Duplexes, the city allows duplexes already in certain zones, but these are great for families that are expanding, trying to stay in Norwalk, want to expand their property so they have an additional income coming in from that unit, or it could be generational. Grandparents want to stay, things like that. So these are just different types. They also could be stacked on top of each other. Triplexes, you don't see this exact housing type a ton in Norwalk. It's kind of a flat roof. Hold on, my dog is being. Sorry about that. But these are a little taller, skinnier format, but it's something we could take a look at to put in Norwalk if that's desired. They're a little smaller but taller. Fourplexes, 4 units, obviously. They're a little more square, wider, but still have a lot of features of the single family zone. In a lot of cases, the parking's in the back and then the building's up in front, with having the door facing the road. Multiplex, 5 to 12 units. This is currently allowed, and we do see these types of building typologies, but not a ton. We'd probably like to see more. So looking at incentives that would have these 5 to 12 unit types. Townhouses, the current regulations allowed for townhouses. I think townhouses are ideal for a lot of people, or a lot of people want them, but we don't see them created. It's kind of a middle ground between wanting a single family house, but not wanting apartment, a little more space, but you also don't have the maintenance perhaps of the yard and snow and things like that. So it could be ideal for a lot of families and folks. Cottage courts aren't currently allowed within Norwalk. It is referenced, something to take a look at within the citywide plan. We'll have to see where these could fit in with Norwalk. Essentially, this is the idea that we could have like tiny homes on one lot, maybe at one communal building that has the laundry and other services, things like that. We pulled in a handful of examples of what we already currently have in our stock, but maybe would like to see more of. The top right is 3 East Wall Street. Pretty new. This was a historic building that was preserved and then expanded out the back to add more units. But from the street front, it looks, not intrusive to the neighborhood. And they were able to keep that historic character.
Yeah, that's top left, Michelle.
top left, sorry. Top left is 3 East Wall, and then top right is I think it's 1-3 Pine Street. It's right off of West Avenue near O'Neill's. And these are some townhouses. These are a little older, but I think something that the city would like to see more of. I think they're interesting and they face the street and kind of keep things interesting, but allow more housing types within that area. 44 Stewart Street, you'll find on the bottom left, that's 4 units, I believe. You'll see that it still has a lot of like single family character and it fits into the neighborhood well. And then last on the right is 96th East Avenue, 11 units. It's similar to 3 East Wall where they had this historic preservation aspect to the project where they had added more units to it. But I think is something we'd like to see more of.
Michelle?
Yep.
Can I ask a question? So what types of units are added in the back of the last 2 you just mentioned on East and Wall? Are they townhouse or apartments?
The one on East Wall are apartments, and I think it was 11 in the existing structure, and then I think it was another 13 out the back, but they're all apartments with parking underneath in the back.
And
then
separate entrances, individual entrances?
no, those have communal entrances.
Okay. And
The
then
one
the one,
on-
the other one on the bottom right?
Yeah, the bottom right is similar in which there's, I think maybe 1 or 2 has a private entrance, but primarily it's all like a communal entrance. This one also on 96 East Avenue has like workspace, like there's availability of communal areas within that development where you could do, work from home and stuff like that.
And then the brick one, the townhouse style, are they 3 levels? Each unit is 3 floors? That's how that
Yes.
looks like? Okay. I
Yep.
wasn't quite sure. Okay.
Yeah, and there's another one, the bottom right one. There's another one that's off of Park Street, right off the green. Same developer. That one, I'll get the address and we'll email it out to you. You might want to just walk around. It's pretty neat development, and most of those have private entrances, and it's sort of like a hybrid of what you see on the bottom right, and then of like what a cottage community could be. It was kind of pretty interesting design, and he's working on a couple other ones. So that's a neat model, but it's just, does that fit in every location? That's a developer who sometimes passes up on a little bit of density to get a little different variety in terms of the design.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's 3 Park Street. We'll send it over. And then I will pass it over to Steve.
Sure. So I think,
Before we get there, Steve, I just I wanted to make a couple of comments and ask a couple of questions because I think this was very helpful. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about as I drive around because I do think we have a lot of older models of this. I think about even in terms of the cottage courts, I can't think of exactly where, but there's over in Hospital Hill, there is a really, to my mind, kind of interesting set of townhomes that kind of face each other with a central court in between. That again felt like a very efficient sort of use of space. I think that my point is that I think there used to be a lot more of this happening, and I'm kind of curious to the extent, is the fact that it hasn't happened much in the last couple of decades just a cost of sort of a feature of the way that land values have increased? Does this relate to some of the things you have raised before about the shift in incentives on condominiums? Like, do you have any sort of theories as to why there seems to have been a dip in this kind of building?
I don't know if I got one answer. So I think it could probably be a lot of those different factors. I would say though, we are seeing, since we've revised our regulations, we're seeing more of the smaller developments. They're not concentrated. They're spread out all over the place. So we are seeing a lot of the 2 to 6 to 10 unit developments, but those don't get in the public eye just because a lot of times they're as of right. So there's just, they come in and they apply for their permit. Their permit gets reviewed and assuming it conforms, they get that. So it doesn't get noticed, but you might be, all of a sudden driving down the street and then, oh yeah, that's a new building, or that's a new building, or that's a new addition in the back. But it's just not prevalent and not noteworthy compared to the larger developments that get all the public attention.
Mhm. No, but that's actually really good to hear that you're getting more applications for this kind of housing, and I think I grew up in Fairfax County, Virginia, which went through an enormous growth boom while I was there as a child, and still continuing. And townhouses in particular really took off. And I'm curious about, to the extent that or can sort of comment on this or think about this, what is sort of the minimum space needed to really do an efficient townhome or a sort of a townhome development that's affordable for a developer to develop? What's the kind of minimum parcel size? How many units do you really need to have? I mean, many of the ones in the area where I grew up were sort of massive, they would buy like essentially an old farm, right? And they would do it on like 15 acres. But, are we seeing the ability to kind of do it here on a half acre, on an acre? What's the what do we understand about what the kind of calculus is for developers on things like on projects like that?
Yeah, we actually did learn that through the zoning rewrite process. And then, as we made changes, the year after it was adopted. So for like a townhouse, you really need 18-foot wide per unit. So that's kind of, so we set up the regulations where even if you have a narrow lot or a substandard lot, as long as if you're building a townhouse, you can do that on that 18-foot sliver. So we have that in the regulations. Now, we haven't seen a lot of people taking advantage of that yet, but we sat down with folks and they, showed us their layout, showed us their floor plan, and then kind of how it could work. And 18-foot is kind of a sweet spot for that.
Okay, interesting. That's good to know. And then I know we're going to talk a tiny bit about ADUs at the end. So, which to be clear are accessory dwelling units. Can you maybe just before you start on sort of your next set of things, can you just explain how accessory dwelling units fit into this sort of missing middle concept?
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump to that now. Michelle, do you want to just go to, I think it's the second to last slide, so we can work in reverse. Not a problem. I probably should have done this stuff up front now that I'm looking at it again, but that's fine.
Well, I think it's super helpful to have the images. Like that's part of why I want to do this conversation, because I think it's very hard to talk about some of these things in the abstract without people really understanding sort of what is a fourplex, right? I think it's really helpful to be able to see things first. So I appreciated the order.
Sure. So over the last, I'd say 2 years, the Planning and Zoning Commission has loosened up the ADU regulations quite a bit. And some of that was spurred by some state regulations that came down where the state kind of said they gave you an option to opt out of the regulation, but the regulation was if you didn't opt out, you had to allow the detached ADUs as of right with, whatever strings that came along with that. We decided to opt out, but at the same time, allow the detached ADUs with how we thought was, best for Norwalk and where Norwalk was at that point in time. Since then, we have seen an increase in the number of ADU applications because we also modified like there's a detached and then what's called the attached, which could be like a basement apartment or whatever that is. We loosened those regulations up to make those larger units to incentivize more of that. But we've since had, calls to, maybe do we want to tweak these regulations even further? Because for the detached ADU, we do require a site plan application, which does require to go through the commission. the site plan application, if it conforms to all the regulations, the commission doesn't have a choice. They have to approve it. So there's been some consideration of, is that even a necessary step at this point? Or do we just want to allow those detached ADUs as of right? Should we increase the size of the detached ADUs to incentivize further development of ADUs? There is a clause in the regulations, and I kind of tend to agree with it at this point, but it does require that the homeowner live in either the ADU or the main dwelling unit. And the concern with not having that clause in there is you could have the potential for absentee landlords who just, aren't invested in the property and potentially don't keep the properties in good condition and kind of let them run down a little bit. We haven't seen that in other areas per se. There are some areas in South Norwalk where there are absentee landlords who don't take care of their buildings. So at this point, I would kind of be of the mindset to keep that clause in there, but I could be persuaded if someone had good evidence to the other. Kind of a cool thing we've been working on is the idea of allowing, if we can get the commission to agree that we don't need a site plan application for the detached ADUs, to develop a process where we have pre-approved detached ADU plans. And we thought it would be kind of fun if we put out a kind of contest where we would have architects and designers develop ADU plans, and we would say pick 10 of them that we thought were nice and leave that up to, we could do that for through a polling process where we let the public say, hey, we like these plans, we wouldn't mind them in our neighbor's backyard per se. So we were thinking we could do some kind of contest and then have these pre-approved plans. We're just not quite sure how we would then get the designer of those plans compensated for the use of those plans. So we're kind of working on that little step there. But we're hoping to have something together sometime before the end of the year for sure, where we'll roll this out to see what everybody's thinking about. And we started having initial conversations with the commission about that, but hasn't really come to a head yet, but that's something we're working on for later this year. But the more we got into this whole affordable housing plan and the work since then, I think that there's definitely no single solution to this issue. I think there's 80 solutions to it, and each little bite at the apple will help. So I think this is just another avenue. I don't know if, the flip side of this is, even if we have pre-approved plans, they're not cheap to build. So I don't know if it's necessarily going to be this like cheap rental unit for somebody. It's probably going to be an expensive rental unit, because if I have to spend 60, 80 grand to construct a detached ADU, even if it's a modular ADU, it's still going to cost me something. So I need to get that payback. So that comes through the rent down the end of the road. So, but I think it does provide a different housing option. And if somebody does that out in one of the more bucolic areas of the city, then that's another housing option where they can live in a unit. Maybe it's not the unit they own, but it's out on a half-acre lawn and they're not necessarily within the city. So it's just another option, and I just think it's another tool in the toolbox.
Thank you. And I think maybe just to step back half a step to that. And Michelle, I think you had an image of an ADU, right? Am I right about that? Was an image of one. So I think that the reason that this whole question of the ADUs fits into this missing middle conversation is that, in essence, an attached dwelling unit, or sorry, an accessory dwelling unit, which can be inside the house or outside the house, in either way, it makes a single family house into a duplex in this sort of context of, it's a way of getting a little bit more density without changing the character really of the neighborhood pretty much at all. And so I think I just wanted to sort of put that framing into it as to why it fits in today's conversation. I think it has been very successful in other cities. I mean, Los Angeles, as I understand it, has really found that an expansion of these accessory units has helped meet some of their housing needs by, as you said, Steve, getting additional housing options into neighborhoods that are otherwise have pretty large lots. And so you can sort of have people take advantage of that without getting crowded out in any way. So I just wanted to put that context on why accessory dwelling units I think are such an important part of the missing middle conversation. Other questions, thoughts about that? I'm very excited about this idea of sort of pre-approved plans, because to your point about cost, getting a plan designed is actually, I think, can be quite a large part of the cost of something like this. The more that it sort of can be, a set of plans, pre-approved. If you are doing this, it's in compliance. We don't have to worry about it. All of those things make this, I think, a much lower the barrier of entry for homeowners who want to add one of these, either because they have family members that they want to assist, or because, as you said, they want to use a rental unit to help bring in income that allows them to stay in the primary house, or, as I've heard has happened with seniors, they want to be able to rent out the primary home and move into the accessory unit so they can downsize while still having income. So all of those options, the more we can lower the barrier to entry by having something that's pre-designed, I think makes a great deal of sense, as a way of reducing costs. But other questions about the accessory dwelling units and how they fit into the larger missing middle kind of question?
Nicole's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Yes. Thank you, Nicole. Go ahead.
No worries. I figured you couldn't see me because I'm still share screen. This is a personal question, but it fits into what we're talking about. So I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, I started to look into putting a unit in the back of our home for my ailing father. And I live in Uptown, District B, and I got met with a lot of confusion from not even designers, but like manufacturers, because I was going to get a pre-factured unit to put there. I thought that would be the easiest, just had to hook up plumbing and electric. And it seemed as if I couldn't do this type of material. I couldn't do this. And it let me with so many questions. Is there a one pager for residents? I know you guys are working on a plan, but is there a one pager for people that are just interested? Maybe, just looking into what their options are, that they can see what they have to do and how they got to do. Because I really think this mid is how we're going to address the crisis. I don't think we are comfortable enough with any more apartments, particularly not luxury, and we yet have not solidified the resources from home ownership. But this might help us continue to eat at the number of units we really do have. So again, is there any like a one pager? And if we don't have it, can we get a one pager for residents to start having the discussion or letting them know that this is an option?
I don't know if I mean, we can definitely do one really easily. I just don't know if we have one already. I have to dig it out. I mean, like when we did prior presentations to the Planning and Zoning Commission, we had all basically what you're asking for. So it's to put it together, if we don't have it already, is a pretty easy task.
Steve, excuse me. Steve, we also put something together for the community event that we
that's
held
right.
We did do something, so we can pull that out as well and see if that answers some of your questions.
But even like talking to the designer, they were asking me, and I'm a council person, but they were asking me the zoning regs, and me trying to dig and see what the zoning regs were was taxing for me. So I could imagine the average constituent, that might be a little too far for them to have to dig here and go there. So I just would really offer that up, and then maybe we can do maybe a social media campaign or something to let people start considering this. I think we might get some interest.
Yeah, we have done that in the past where we did some outreach. It was a while ago, but like working through like the senior center and different, trying to target the people that might want to take advantage of that. We have done that in the past.
Can I make another suggestion building on that, because I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Outreach to potential owners who might be interested. But the other place, I wonder if, you all could do a webinar or a seminar or something targeted at builders. Because I think part of the question Ms. Ayers is raising, I think makes a ton of sense to me. Really helping the folks who do this have an understanding of kind of what the options are, what you're open to, where to find the particular regs. And that might be a way of, is also a question we've talked about before, right? Supporting our local builders and our local small business folks, particularly those who might be interested in taking the next step in their business. Giving them some resources to maybe make them more competitive. And that might be a really interesting target market for this. Also, quite frankly, as you're starting to think about things like, designs that would be, easily approved as of right, et cetera, maybe getting some of the local construction folks also involved in that conversation to be able to provide feedback on things that are more cost effective because they're easier to build, et cetera. I don't know. I think that might be an interesting outreach opportunity to take advantage of.
Yeah, we're open to any suggestion on that kind of stuff. So that's for sure.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, I think that could be a fun thing for the council to sort of, work with you on, encourage you on. Because I do take Ms. Ayers' point, having worked on a very large home construction project myself, you are, as a homeowner, extremely dependent on the knowledge base of the folks who can actually do the construction. And to the extent that they are unaware of options, through no fault of their own, they may not be presenting things to you. And so, that might be a real mechanism there that we could build on. Other questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Steve, how many, I'm sorry, Miss Edie, how many, you said you had a few applicants, ADA applications? ADU, I'm sorry.
Oh,
How
how many new ones?
How many new ones?
I'd say at least 6 or 8 since the detached have come in, and we can get you firm numbers on that because we do track that because of the affidavit process they have to do every year. So we do know the exact number.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, because I'd love to see that number be like 100, not like 68, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, we're not going to make much of a dent if we do it 8 a year. It's not going to
But
get us
may I
very
ask
far.
about I'm sorry, Nora, but may I ask about the application? Because this goes again to what I'm saying. So we want more people to submit applications, but just talking to people, I don't think they understand. I don't think it's the application process. I really don't think people understand the whole ADU regulations because I thought I understood until I went to talk to the contractor and then I got all confused again. So I think there is some education on our end that might need to be done to motivate people or to help people get to that ADU because we're saying, oh, it's around $60,000. That might not sound so much in the big scheme of things in Fairfield County. But when I was talking to the contractor, oh, it was much more than $60,000. So I think we have some work to do to kind of get people to even get in the application process.
That's why I think if you had the pre-approved modular type unit would probably be cheaper. I don't know how much cheaper, but it would be somewhat cheaper potentially.
Yeah, which makes it very much worth exploring. Miss Edie, and then I have one more thought.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. So when you guys start looking at putting things together for the ADUs, please feel free to drag me in because I'm really excited to help with that. Number two, Steve, you said you could be persuaded about the owner-occupied ADUs. I'll try to persuade you on that one. Also, you said, and we did say if it's detached, we can increase the square footage over 700. Is that what it is now?
Yeah, that's what it is now. And the commission's kind of gone back and forth on that a few times on whether that 700 number is a good number, too much. I mean, I think they would, to be honest with you, there's not a huge difference between 700 and 800, but what's the sweet spot where everybody's comfortable? I don't know if it's 1,000,
Yeah.
potentially something like that.
Yeah, okay, we could talk about that too. But can I just jump back to the tracker portion that we talked about, that Michelle gave earlier, with all the density bonus and everything? I just want to first say thank you, very, very much for working on these, what we call low-hanging fruit. Of course, the up to the 90% SMI is, what I've been like hoping for. And I just wanted to know, when is that effective immediately?
Yes, that was the one I couldn't remember, and I looked it up when Michelle was going through her beginning of her presentation. So what we did as an incentive, because as Ms. Edie had pointed out, that sometimes you get to a point where your income exceeds 80% and you're no longer eligible to stay in a workforce unit. But that, you're at 81% or 82%, and that we're finding that even at that level, you're still struggling to, pay your rent and utilities and food and all those things. So what we did was we put in a bonus provision in the regulations where you can get I think it's a 5% bump, where you can do units that are deed restricted permanently, where the SMI doesn't exceed 90. So that goes above what say you're allowed by the density in that particular property to build 50 units. We'll give you that 5% bonus that doesn't count towards that 50, but those units have to be also deed restricted no more than 90% of SMI. And then we also, keeping in mind that if you're above that, they don't count towards the workforce units, so they're also above that 10% trigger. So we put a similar clause into that. If we ever get down to that 12%, that we would claw that back. But again, I don't think based on the number of units we're talking about, I don't think we're going to ever get close to that.
Right. And so the part with the income cap,
Mhm.
what you said you can get, up to 90% of the SMI. SMI is 120,000, right?
It depends on family size, but Michelle probably has that down pat.
Information. Right. Okay. Is that effective immediately?
That's in effect now.
Okay. And that's great. I'm leaping for joy. I'm doing backflips right now over that. All right, I'm sure you already did. I'm just asking, have you let all the property managers know this?
Michelle,
Yes.
we did talk about that.
Yeah, we sent out a notice via email to all the administrators that are in charge of enforcing the
Okay.
regulations on site. So we let them know about the change to the regulations and to notify us when they utilize it.
Right. Okay. That's great news. So the form that gives you the requirements, the affordable requirements and the rate, shows the income, family size, that has changed. So do we have that like ready to go, where it shows the income caps?
For the 90%?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
that's
yeah.
I don't have that. I might, but it hasn't come up yet. But it's an easy tweak in the Excel sheet just to change the 80 to the 90 and it'll spit out the numbers.
Okay.
So if you want
Okay.
that, I can share that as
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I think I'm good so far. So thank you. Oh, one more thing. I just wanted you guys, if you wanted an example of townhomes, the ones on 12 Van Zandt Street are exactly what I love. And it's only 5 units, but it's a very nice small development. But that's the type of thing. So if anybody gets time to drive past, check it out.
Was that
Thank you.
12 Van Zandt?
12 Van Zandt. There's 5 units, townhouse units. I don't think they're affordable, but that's the type of stuff I'm talking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Edie. Mr. Seed.
Yeah, so I had a question, just because like since we're the ad hoc affordable housing, a lot of times like we talk about these things, and then once they go into effect, people are kind of like, well, this is not truly affordable. So like with these, without doing like the tax breaks and different things like that, or the tax incentives, or abatements, sorry, how do we ensure that these are actually going to be affordable, for people? Because like Mr. Kleppen said, um, the cost of building these units um are expensive and people have to recoup the money. So how do we ensure that these are actually going to be like truly affordable to people who need them?
So the ADUs, there's no mechanism with that unless you said the only way you can do these ADUs is if they were like deed restricted ADUs in terms of the affordability. But so if they're just, someone's building the ADU in their backyard and it's going to cost $80,000, I don't think we'd have anybody taking advantage of that if we told them they would have to make those deed restricted at a certain affordability level. I don't think financially it would make any sense for anybody to pursue that. But
Oh.
No, I was just going to say, but on the, if someone's building like a typical residential development, that we have control over those units within there that are deed restricted.
Yeah, so just to follow up a couple of thoughts that come to my mind on that. So the first thing I want to say is something that the mayor of Hartford spoke to some folks from the city, from Norwalk a few weeks ago. I think Ms. Edie, you were on that call. And for folks who don't know him, he ran Hartford's land bank before he became mayor of Hartford, and he had a lot of really interesting things to say about affordable housing. And one of the core points he made that I hadn't really myself fully intuited or understood is that all housing units actually help with the affordability problem. Because if you have an insufficient number of luxury units, folks who can afford luxury buy available properties at a lower tier and renovate them into the luxury market. And so it is actually incredibly important to just period have more housing, and every available additional home absorbs some of the need in the market, and having more at the higher end actually has really helped keep some of the housing in the middle still in the middle, as opposed to having it move into the luxury side. And I thought that was actually very helpful to understand in terms of this whole space. And I think it is part of why even something like an ADU, even if it's not technically affordable, is part of the long-term solution to this. The other thing that I think Steve was referencing that is, I think, really helpful for all of us to think about, well, I guess they're sort of two interrelated points. So one is, as Steve said, even in this missing middle piece, if we're talking about more than 10 units, it does fall, as I understand it, into this requirement of workforce housing that if you're building more than 10 units, you have to set aside some as meeting is deed restricted affordable. So even if I understand it, Steve, if I'm correct, if you're building more than 10 townhouse units, then you have to set aside one of those townhouse units as deed restricted affordable, correct?
Yeah. So even if you do less than 10, so say you do 9, you have to pay a fee. So there's a fee
Right.
involved regardless. But once you hit 10, you have to give us at least 1 unit for that.
Right. So this missing middle housing can, again, even if the missing middle housing, even if most of it is on the luxury side, it still does chip away at our problem, in the specific. And then I think there's the question of how you use tax abatements to incentivize missing middle housing that is targeted in the more affordable range. And so I think that's like a next layer of options to think about. And that's the kind of thing that I think we as a city would have to wrestle a little bit. How big does a project have to be for it to qualify for tax abatements, right? I don't know that it's realistic for the city to negotiate tax abatements for like an 8-unit project, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is. Like, I think that's part of the conversation that we really need to be having here between planning and zoning and ordinance and this committee to try to understand sort of where the parameters are. But then it also, I think, becomes the question that this committee has talked about before as well, which is how are there ways that the city can help identify sites that are available in some way, shape, or form to do larger developments of missing middle size. So can we help locate a site that might be like a 3 or 4 acre site to use for tiny homes or for townhouses? And then can we as the city help package some kind of incentive that helps make that then affordable in a way that all of the building on that site could be affordable. So I think Mr. Seed, I don't know, does that help answer sort of how some of this might intersect?
Yeah, I think I think it does. And my point only for bringing it up is that, and we know it, so I'm just kind of preaching to the choir, but I just kind of want to put it on the record is that you got people who like live in Norwalk now, and like they hear, and not to minimize this because I think this is great work, but they hear like what they feel is buzzwords and affordable housing or missing units, and then when it comes out, they don't really see the effect. And that's why I wanted like the trickle down. I get it, but I think that we should do justice in kind of explaining that to people so that people understand that like Mr. Kleppen has said, there's not one solution to the problem. We got to chip away at this at many different ways. But I just think when we talk about it to people, because it kind of get triggering to people, because people hear like workforce housing or affordable, and then they go to apply for it or reach out to it, and then it's still unaffordable, unattainable for them. So, which it's a complex issue, and not to say that what we're doing is not helping, but I just kind of want to put that on the record so that we could kind of clearly say it to people, so people understand that hey, it's a process and we got to tackle it from multiple angles.
Well, and I think even more than that, I think that, and this is what is so hard, but we have to keep driving home on, the trickle down is not going to help. And I'm not even sure, I don't think trickle down is the right word, but none of this is going to help if it's not enough, right? 8 units is not going to make a difference, right? We like the scale of what needs to be done here to make a difference is massive, right? We can't have 8 ADUs and expect that that's somehow going to help us. I mean, if we really want accessory dwelling units, and we really do have to be careful about the jargon. If we really want, accessory dwelling units as a way to help, I mean, we need to be talking about hundreds of them if they're going to actually be a significant contributor. In the same way that, a duplex only adds 1 unit over a single family home, right? So if we want duplexes to be part of the solution, we need to talk about how we can build hundreds of them, right? So I think that is part of the issue here, is that we need to help figure out how to move from the sort of exploratory stage and the getting comfort with the idea stage, and the stage that I think I really agree with what you're talking about, Steve and Michelle, right now, of again getting models that work, that are sort of pre-approved or pre-designed, as Ms. Ayers has said, really getting information out to people. But then we need to do that stage relatively quickly, so then we can move to the stage of actually helping generate these in fairly large quantities if it's going to be meaningful. Because if it happens only in little bits and pieces, it's not going to move the needle. So anyway, I see Ms. Roman, and I would love to get your thoughts added into this conversation.
First, I just want to say thank you guys so much for this presentation, because, this middle part of housing is often overlooked. So I really do appreciate all the work that's being done here. Just a question that I would like to add to contribute to what Jalen was asking is, what are we doing to ensure that these new developments are, yes, one, deeply affordable units, which I believe you just kind of addressed, but also that they are going to be kind of, I don't want to use the word targeting, but targeted mostly to who's being affected currently by Norwalk's housing crisis. So particularly communities of colors, families with children, people with disabilities, who often do face these barriers to fair housing access currently.
And I think that is, a really important piece of this, right? And and that's, I think, to my mind, part of why this conversation has to be in part about making sure that we're doing this on a large enough scale to make a difference, right? Because as Steve and Michelle, and I think yourself, are probably deeply aware, there are legal restrictions on the ways in which we can and cannot kind of target housing options to different groups. And those are all in place for very good reasons. But they also have in some ways the unintended consequence of limiting our ability to sort of make sure that the housing is sort of filling needs of current residents as opposed to, you know, anyone in the state or anyone anywhere who's interested. So I think that, you know, that, and I think that we've talked a little bit in this committee about ways of streamlining the application process to help make it easier for current residents to find these homes. And that may be a way of, even if we are not preferentially treating our current residents, if our current residents know how to find that information, that incentive, you know, makes it easier for them to have a leg up on folks who may not be as aware of that mechanism. I think those are things to consider. And it also, I think, I mean, these are questions we really need to keep talking about. What else can we do to make sure that the housing that we are helping develop is meeting the needs of current residents? And, you know, home ownership is obviously something we've talked about being a huge part of that. We've talked about whether we can pursue, you know, with our state legislature, some protection mechanisms that we don't currently have access to in the city, you know, for protections for current tenants. But I certainly, you know, Mr. Roman, if you've got ideas of things that we should be throwing into the mix, I think we'd really welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to, you know, having a larger conversation with that outside of the commission and meetings, just to brainstorm and figure out what would be the best course of action to then bring to these. So yeah, my email's always open. So when you guys are ready, we could definitely sit down, because there are plenty of marketing things we can do and other approaches even in the planning stage as well. So I'm really happy to hear that these are all things that you guys are already thinking about and working towards.
Terrific. I think we would really love to bring your expertise into that conversation. So, and two other things that I just don't want to forget. And then I know we are, as always, slightly over time. And Steve, we still didn't get to the last part of your presentation, which we can save whether the committee wants to do that or save it for next time. But the other point about accessory dwelling units that I wanted to bring into this conversation, and actually in some ways this whole missing middle conversation maybe is actually a really important part of this. You know, there is also, I think, a very real and important concern about illegal versions of this that are happening in the city. And the dangers that poses, right? It is to have an apartment that is an accessory apartment that has not been approved, you know, is risky from a fire perspective, right? The fire department doesn't necessarily know that unit is occupied. You know, there are, you know, it may not be meeting, you know, safe egress requirements. So how can we use the fact that we are trying to incentivize these kinds of housing to help bring illegal structures into compliance? How can we help? What, you know, is there some way that we can do educational campaigns, incentives, targeted enforcement to transform existing illegal apartments into safe and compliant accessory apartments? Or, you know, or turn it, you know, a house that's been split into a duplex, triplex, getting that sort of properly structured to be a legal triplex as opposed to an illegal one.
And that's a big question. Just because you know, when somebody converts something illegally, the biggest concern is, was the work done in conformance with, you know, really from a building code perspective? Because a lot of times you see that, you know, who's doing the wiring? Are they wiring it correctly? Because then that can lead to fires. And do they have the right access out of the building? You know, proper means of egress. So those are the big concerns. I know other communities have done things where they've grandfathered in illegal units to try to bring them into conformance and up to snuff. I don't know what the appetite for that would be. I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation to see what the public would think about that, because we get a ton of complaints about illegal apartments to begin with. So if you're then going to grandfather those in, what is the reaction going to be to allowing that? So I don't know if I've got a good answer for that, but I mean, it's an interesting conversation for sure.
Right, because we certainly don't want to reward illegality. On the other hand, if if it, you know, if we want to see more of this kind of housing anyway, helping the people who, you know, helping get it to a quality of or a standard of quality that actually makes it safe, you know, might be valuable. So I don't know, Ms. Young, I think
Yeah,
it
and,
looks like you wanted
doesn't
to
push
talk.
the person out, you know, and so
Right.
that then pushes someone out potentially, because now you've got to you've got to put money into that, right? You've got to remodel or whatever the deficiencies might be. It has, that's a double-edged sword. I mean, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed one way or the other, because illegal dwellings are a hazard, or a safety hazard.
Yeah, I know the last two that were the illegal apartments that had the fires that I
Right.
read the articles. Neither of those showed any signs that there were illegal units within that.
Mhm.
We had no complaints, nothing didn't pop on anybody's radar. So and you know, those are sometimes the scariest ones because it's, you know, this construction methodology or how they define the unit or set the unit up is real sketchy sometimes. And, you know, people take shortcuts with wiring and don't
Right.
do things correctly. And that's when you have problems.
And lastly, I just want to say, Chair, I to this conversation, I know we're talking about the future, but as we continue to develop, land becomes scarce, more scarce as we go on, as far as availability to build on. And so I think there's a lot that we have to talk about. How do we as a city move forward in a way and quickly enough so that we have some opportunities to build? And when you talk about a development, Norton Place is the ideal place to be able to do all those things to make a real community out of.
Right.
You know, but you know, as we go on, it's going to become an issue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that is sort of the, you know, the sense of urgency with some of this is that we are close to a tipping point if we are not already over it. And, you know, I think we need to get creative fast. And as you say, think about how we can get hold of what remains of available spaces quickly. You know, if we want to really, again, if these are the kinds of housing developments that people want, which is really what I think I'm hearing, right? You know, then we need to sort of move before the cost becomes so prohibitive that it is unrealistic that it will be affordable and you know, in any reasonable way. I know we've really run late, Steve. Well, let me ask folks, Steve, so Steve has some additional materials in here about some of the zoning changes that were made last year, I think 2 years ago. I've now tracked, it's amazing how time flies, that allowed for more of this kind of middle housing in Norwalk. Do we have time to run through that quickly? Do people need to hop off? What do
I'm
folks
good.
think? You want to stay?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, so Steve, do you mind just sort of then finishing out this presentation so we can kind of, you know, finish up and make sure that everyone is aware of sort of where the city currently is so that we can
Sure.
be better informed about creative going forward?
Yeah. I'm at Michelle's mercy in terms of back up. So give me 2 seconds and I'll go quick. You got it, Michelle, or no?
It's fighting me. It was up too long and here we go.
Right, I was gonna say
Hold
it's
on.
frozen now. It's like, wait, I thought you were gonna excuse me from duty.
Yeah, it's just not wanting to go on. Let me see if you see it or
Yep.
not.
Oh,
Okay.
now it's coming up. Yep.
Okay,
got it.
cool. Sorry about
All
that.
right. There you go. Okay. I thought it would be important just to kind of talk about a little bit of kind of the philosophy and how things have come to pass. Excuse me. So kind of some guiding principles, and these are really within the plan of conservation and development that we follow pretty strictly, and some of the other planning studies we've done is and this led to the rezoning and how that zoning map is set up and why it's set up the way it is we kind of tried to create really what the downtown is. And, you know, Norwalk had kind of a split Wall Street, South Norwalk around Washington Street. So we kind of consolidated things and made like an urban core, which kind of runs basically from Route 1 north of Wall Street down to Concord Street and then along the South Norwalk train station. So that's really Norwalk's downtown. That's where you see the bulk of the, bigger apartment buildings being built. And that was kind of by design. There's a secondary area that was kind of done with some rezoning around the Merritt 7 station. And then you have some smaller areas like around East Norwalk train station, which there was a TOD plan done. And you're seeing everybody's favorite development at 1 Cemetery Street being built. And then also we're looking at, what should the Route 1 corridor look like? And are there any opportunities in and around that area? And then as you move away from those areas, the density decreases. So it's kind of what we try to do with the zoning map is really try to make it like a smart growth model. Ideally, Norwalk would be a circle, and then the densest area would be at the middle where the train station is, and it gets less dense as you move out. But Norwalk's kind of built like a cross with following the major road networks. So that's we tried to follow a model where we go from very dense or Norwalk version of very dense to a little less dense, and then less dense as you move away from city facilities, job areas, amenities, and those kind of things. And with the goal of really trying to provide different housing options for everybody. We talked a lot about ADUs before, so we don't need to go back into it. But again, this is just different options through the way the zoning scheme works. Next one, Michelle. Again, and we've talked about this. So who are we trying to provide housing for? There's a whole list of, really anybody who needs housing or wants housing should have the opportunity to have housing. That could range from people looking to downsize, single occupant household, young professionals, obviously our workforce, which was really the impetus for the workforce housing program, police, firefighters, we want those folks, teachers to be able to live in the city without having to drive an hour away, because that just adds costs for everybody and adds more cars to the road. So that's just not the ideal setup. Not everybody wants to own a house. A lot of people would like to own a house that can't. And then there are people that we've talked about as well that need support. So that whether that's through some kind of rental assistance program or completely supportive services. So there's a whole gambit of individuals who need different housing types. Next one, Michelle. So as part of the zoning rewrite process, despite what you might hear, there really wasn't an increase in the densest areas of the city, like what we talked about, the Wall Street area, South Norwalk. Those areas didn't expand. We did pretty exhaustive planning work on those areas starting in, before I got here in 2015, 2016, and then in Wall Street around 2019, and made zoning changes as part of that. So we really didn't expand those areas out. And the zoning map is set up to expand or contract around those areas as the city needs to grow or decides it's grown too far. So that's kind of, we set it up to be pretty flexible. As part of the rewrite, we ended up rezoning 436 properties that were formerly single family zoned to allow them to be 2-family zoned as of right. And that's now the CD2 zone. And the important thing about that I'm a big proponent of is if you have 2-family dwellings, I think it increases the possibility for home ownership, because you have those duplexes or a 2-family house. I think the likelihood of those both being in separate ownership increases quite a bit. And there were also 375 properties that were rezoned from 2-family to multifamily. And that could go up to 3 units to like 10 units, something along those lines. Initially, when there was the big controversy, we had over 4,000 properties that were proposed to go from single family to 2-family. And, that did cause some controversy. So that was scaled back quite a bit. But as part of that, and what we ultimately settled on was, why did we do this? So all those areas are areas we considered walkable in terms of their access to transit, whether they're access to employment areas or related to city services or to amenities, or more importantly to food. Where are all these grocery stores and how do we get there? So having people to have to drive to all these grocery stores is kind of a problematic thing as well. Next slide, Michelle.
Steve,
we
can I
did-
ask a question? I'm sorry, can
Certainly.
you go
Yeah,
back?
go
Can I-
ahead.
Is it okay? I just want to
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
So when you said the initial zoning proposal was approximately over 4,000 properties, so what was the concern and what area, what zones were they in? Were they in the city part, or what parts of the
Yeah, actually, you
city
can
were those in?
just go to the next slide, Michelle. And that was kind of sort of part of where I was going.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, you know, it's good because I'll expand on the slide to answer your question. So what we started out doing is we applied, you know, there's walk sheds. I don't know if you're familiar with what the term a walk shed is, but that's basically what someone is willing to walk to get to something. So whether it's transit, your job, a grocery store, so whatever, there's different walk sheds based on what that use is. So we set up the zoning to go from 1 to 2 family based on walk sheds, and we kind of put a standard on there of about a half a mile. And we provided a half-mile buffer around like Route 1, Connecticut Ave, Westport Ave, Main Ave, also around the hospital and around the train stations to do that, where the existing zoning already didn't allow for more dense areas. We put these walk sheds on there and said, all right, this makes sense to upzone these areas from 1 family to allow 2 families as of right. I think from a, and I could share these memos with you, that and Brian and our office did a lot of really good technical work on this, and I'm happy to forward out the research he did. I think from a technical standpoint, we really made very strong arguments. Where I think we failed was just getting people over that hurdle of impacts in terms of where cars are going to park. Will this lead to overly trafficked roads in my neighborhood? Is it going to change the complexion of this single family neighborhood that I bought? We did as part of that research, zones that were changed from 1 to 2 family, or that could allow 2 family houses as of right. We found that in about 100 years time, only about 50% of those properties took advantage of that ability to go from 1 unit to 2 unit. And I don't know what the reason was. And I think it's probably because a lot of those neighborhoods had established single family houses on the street. And that's the way, when people bought in, that's the way they liked it. And that's how they wanted it to remain. So I think we learned a bunch of lessons as part of this, that I would do some things differently in terms of outreach. But I will say we did a ton of outreach, working through council, working through neighborhood groups. We met with anybody and everybody that wanted to talk. But I think what I would do differently next time, if we were proposing something along this scale, would be to start on like an individual street. Like Bettswood was one that came to mind, where we had a bunch of residents that had concerns. I would set up a meeting of just Bettswood Road folks and say, here's what we're thinking about doing and why. And then also spend more money up front and more time on visuals, where we would have kind of like renderings of, okay, this is what your neighborhood looks like now. Here's what it could look like if you allowed 2 family dwellings and how it would impact the street overall. Here's how parking would be addressed. Try to approach it from that vantage point. And then I would definitely be open to any other strategies people had in terms of outreach. And I think, I hear a lot that, and I think Ms. Young touched on it. There really is no more land for things. There's city parcels and city assets that, are parking lots that you could think about repurposing for higher and better use, which you would have control over what occurs on those properties. But in terms of privately undeveloped land, it really doesn't exist for residential development at this point in time. It's, I don't know where that's coming from. So to say we can get home ownership on those lots, I'm surprised. I don't understand how that would happen. Next slide, Michelle.
Can I just really real quick reiterate that point, Steve, because I do think that that is a reality that we have to grapple with and we have to be honest about and talk
That-
about, right? It does not exist. And anything we want to do to increase home ownership at this point is going to involve needing something other than a single family home.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, you could take all the 1 acre zone properties and make half an acre zone. I don't think that would be a very popular proposal, but that's a way to get more density. But and again, that's also runs, when you do that, you also kind of run afoul of, you're adding more cars to the road when you do that. Because think about if you took double the density in Silvermine, for example, that's just, no one's taking the bus from there to get to the train station. They're getting in their cars. You have more cars on the road, which leads to a whole another host of problems. So there's not like a simple, oh, this works and this will solve the problem. And it doesn't flow that way. We did, as part of that zoning change, we did really try to incentivize the 2-family houses. Another lesson learned would have been, I would have had the budget increase to hire architects to like plan this out for us a little bit better, because Brian and I did our best to try to come up with regulations that would accommodate the 2-family houses. But when we put some of the regulations in effect, because it's not just, the intent of the new zoning regulations wasn't just to add 2-family houses. There was a whole host of things we wanted to work on. Reduce drainage, sustainability was a big part of what we were looking at. What's the right amount of parking required? Reducing asphalt wherever we could. So we put all these series of regulations in. And another big one was runoff on the residential property. So there were no regulations in place prior to our changes that controlled grading and site development. So now we control that to make sure when I build my house that I don't dump all my water on my neighbor. So there's a whole host of regulations that went in to impact that. But in combination, they ended up making it difficult for somebody to build some of these 2-family houses. So the developers came to us and were like, great, thanks for changing the zoning, but now we can't build anything because your regulations are too strict. So we met with them. We put in a whole host of changes within like 3 months and a couple more after that to fix some of those problems. And I think the next slide kind of shows some of these changes. So these are not, rendering. So these are just plans submitted. Oop, there you go. These are just plans submitted for 2 different styles of 2-family houses that I think are under construction. I don't know exactly what phase they're at. The one on the left has 2 front-facing garages. Front-facing garages in a perfect planning design world are not the most attractive, but this development managed to pull off a design that's pretty nice. We said, if you want to do front-facing garages, you have to have those built 30 feet back to accommodate the parking and traffic. The building on the right on Melrose actually has the parking at the rear. So there's 2 different ways to do that. And if you do the parking at the rear, we let them build to 20 feet in the zone to try to give them flexibility. We reduced the regulations on where the retaining walls could go and also how far the driveway had to be off the property line. So all these things work in combination. And I think both of them, you can go to the next slide, Michelle, are 2 different viable alternatives. I probably have to zoom in really tight to show you the widths of these, but the building on the left has the units side by side, and the building on the right has the units front to back. So these are 2 models, which I think are fairly attractive, and hopefully when they get built, the Planning and Zoning Commission, we talked about, okay, when these are done, we might, I'm going to advise everybody to go out and take a look, and they're saying, is this developed product, not just the building, but where the driveways are, where the parking is this attractive? And did we get the regulations right, or do we need to fix them more? But I think at least we have come up with a couple viable models at this stage to kind of move things along. Next slide, Michelle. Oh, and we did ADU, so I'm done. And I know Miss Edie has a question.
Thank you. Just real quick. From our last meeting, where the gentleman came to talk about tax incentives, he did say we did get a higher rate of ROIs on conversions, of course, duplexes and all that. But is there a way we can get a quick list? Not, I'm saying quick, but a list of commercial properties that are empty, that are that can be easily converted into units as well. Because we gonna have to chip away, since we don't have the land. We're gonna have to chip away on all types of things. So do we have that access to that information?
We have some of that. It's actually really good timing. It's almost like I fed you that question. So, so there actually are 3 properties that came into foreclosure that we're getting a lot of calls about. One is 200 Connecticut Avenue. The other one, it's Richards, and I think it's 40 Richards. Both of those were like 60s or 70s vintage office buildings that are pretty much totally vacant now. The existing regulations, so there's like that whole conversion formula and different things. We don't prevent anybody from converting it. So our process is not hard. However, for those particular buildings, the density is not there for somebody there's no, it's not going to pencil out because the buildings are massive, but you can only do like 30 units of housing in those buildings. So they're all saying, well, we want to do density at least what you can do down in South Norwalk by the train station, or even higher. And I'm like, well, you're not going to get higher. So, that probably is not going to happen. But I've also told them, if you want to get to a high density, we're going to want something in return. So we're going to want 20% affordable or something like that. So we're working on regulations now. We don't have that many office buildings that are vacant where it's like, oh, we have to do something now or it's a complete crisis. I'd rather come up with a formula that people are comfortable with in terms of, because we're going to have to increase the density, but it's a question of, if you want to convert it in these zones, you're going to have to give us something that the city needs, like affordable housing. How do you make these buildings more sustainable? Because right now it's like it's either asphalt, concrete, or building. So it's, not helping anybody. So those are what we're working on. I actually had a couple people starting to kind of put different tools together, but we're not at a point where we have something in writing yet.
Okay. Can some of those buildings be knocked down and someone starts from the beginning?
They could, but the most sustainable building is a repurposed building, not a knockdown building. So,
Well, some, I'm just saying maybe some might be just.
Yeah, it's possible. Those lots where those 2 particular buildings are, they're not right on the road. So it's not like you could knock it down and put up another Wegmans or something like that. They're kind of, one of them's in the rear. So it's like, what would go there that's viable if it wasn't what it is right now?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And it's so funny because I think I know, I was driving by one of those recently and thinking, God, I wonder if we could convert that, because it just seems like a useless as an office space. A suggestion for consideration, I would love to see a deliberate intent to require housing there that is affordable for folks who work in those retail establishments along Connecticut Avenue. So starting from a question of, if you are working at Stop and Shop, ShopRite, Best Buy, what would be an affordable rent for you? And that may be significantly lower than our current workforce housing level. But I would think that would be in many ways the best bang for our buck. If the goal is to reduce traffic on Connecticut Avenue, really being deliberate and targeted towards creating housing for folks who work there. And that might be a really nice alignment of sort of multiple goals in one. And, again, if you're thinking about regulations, like that would be a regulation I would love to see. And we might take, and there arguably we might be better off taking fewer affordable units if they are more affordable for folks that then it would work towards the traffic problem. And it might be also, it might be worth actually talking to folks who work at our retail establishments. Like that might be, to your point that you made earlier, Steve, about doing more targeted outreach. Like really, having someone go and talk to folks who work at these various establishments and ask them, what are they looking for in housing? Where are they currently living? What are they paying? What would they be willing to pay if they could walk to work? would they be willing to walk to work? What is a walk shed for someone? I recognize that is not the most attractive walk in the world to walk up and down Connecticut Avenue. On the other hand, walking to work is sort of everyone's dream, and certainly would reduce costs. So that might really be worth engaging people, not making assumptions, but actually talking to them and finding out.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. And I know we've got a pretty good relationship with Wegmans right now, so I think that they might be interested in that as well.
Sure, right. Maybe they'd be willing to kick in a little subsidy in order to have their workforce be a little happier, right? That's not
Yeah.
would not be a bad thing. I have an interesting conversation with an architect friend, of sort of on this point, and she was talking about the ways in which the construction, because I had said, why can't we just build units on top of all of these big box stores, right? If you build a Home Depot, you should be required to provide sufficient units for your workforce to live there, right? Not that necessarily they're all going to want to, right? But it's sort of one of those, if you are going to be providing jobs that are at a salary level that is lower than the salary currently required to live in Norwalk, shouldn't you be responsible for helping create housing to house your employees? And she was pointing out that the style of construction of those stores would not support sort of units above them. And again, this might be something that we should, as you said, this is not an emergency, this is not urgent, but really something to start exploring. If we are going to if we're already requiring changes in how the construction is being done on Connecticut Avenue, do we make a really targeted, thoughtful, what would it take to require construction that could support units and have units that are intended for the workforce be part of building of any more of these kind of big boxes? Something to think about potentially.
Yeah, we did as part of the zoning rewrite. They are now, we haven't had any big since that regulation was passed, but we do require a fee now too. So they're subject to the inclusionary fee.
Great.
So like if that was in effect when Wegmans was approved, that would have been a pretty fat check.
Yeah, yes, I would think so. And it is, and it's, but, and I think this gets back to the point about there being no more land. The fee is great, but if the land is so expensive and unavailable that the fee doesn't buy us much, we might be better off getting the units as part of the project. And again, I don't know. These are just, we're tossing out ideas at this point, but something to maybe think about as you're considering this question, particularly if there's going to be more people looking on at conversions and other things on Connecticut Avenue. It might be a good time to strategize about that. Can I toss out one more thing that I noticed from your presentation? And since I'm not running for re-election, I am just going to hit third rails all the way down. We have transit-oriented development at Merit 7. We have transit-oriented development at East Norwalk. We have transit-oriented development at South Norwalk. The one train station we have not talked about is Row 8. So is there any plan to do a study on what transit-oriented development would look like at the Row 8 train station?
No. We did, as part of the rewrite, we did kick around the potentially going to that the CD2 zone around the train station, which is that allows the two-family. That was met with pretty strong resistance.
Fair enough. It does not surprise me, but I do think that it is an idea to get, out there for the future. We, at the end of the day, I think that building that sidewalk from the Rowayton train station down to the Rowayton Market is maybe the start of a conversation about what it looks like. And, in a weird way, Rowayton is actually quite a bit denser than much of the rest of the city, right? There has been so much infill. If you walk around there, right, the lots are often quite small. It's my understanding that virtually all, or quite a large number of Rowayton houses at this point go before the ZBA because they're all trying to build more dense, either because they're larger or closer together than the actual zoning for the area. And so, as challenging as it might be a conversation worth beginning. And also, quite frankly, seeing whether what has happened in Rowayton provides a model for how we do greater density in some of our other more suburban character areas, right? Because those long, I don't know what you sort of call them, but the long driveways back, there's essentially been a house built on the back side of a unit. So I think they were probably eventually, it was a lot that was probably subdivided. I think there are things when we're looking for models, when we're trying to help people visualize what this looks like. I think a lot of it has actually happened in Rowayton sort of organically. And as a conversation that might be worth having for as we think about how we're going to do this in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to have to be looking at some of our farther outlying areas to get the kind of numbers we're going to need to meet the demand. So, other thoughts, folks? I know we've ran way over and I really appreciate everyone's patience, but this was so interesting. And I'm so grateful to you, Steve and Michelle, for putting this together. I think it really helped me see a lot of what we're talking about. Anyone else?
No, I just think that I just think these meetings have been very informative and really helpful. So thank you. We just got to keep going and start building now, right? Getting some land or doing something. But this is good. This is good. And I think the next step is really going to be talking about some creative partnerships, right? Private public partnerships and land trusts and all those kinds of things, and how we get money to support what we're trying to do. At both the local and state level, right? Because we've got some work to do with this, but good work. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Steve.
Well,
and Michelle.
thank you, Steve and Michelle, and thank you, everyone. So
Yeah,
we
the
will.
whole committee.
Yes, so we will plan to convene for September. If folks have particular topics that they want to, suggest for this kind of ongoing exploration work, shoot me an email. And Steve and Michelle we'll talk about the getting together in August to talk about the tracker and figure out sort of agenda for the next couple months. So I really appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a wonderful August.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.